Hey there, fantasy owners. Welcome to Lift the Cup Fantasy, or LTC Fantasy as some people call it. And we're continuing along with our 21-22 team reviews. Today we're going to look at the Ottawa Senators. Check out who led them in different stats for goaltenders, defensemen, and forwards. Who's their biggest fantasy surprise? Who's their biggest fantasy disappointment? And who on their roster was fantasy relevant on a week-to-week basis? We'll also take a peek at some streamers that did help you out throughout the season at varying points there. These videos do continue to come out a few times a week, because what better way to spend the fantasy offseason than watch the playoffs and talk a little bit of fantasy hockey. Don't forget to subscribe. That way you can catch your favorite teams review. Maybe you want to catch your rivals review. Maybe you want to catch all 32. Or just take a peek at a team that sometimes gets overlooked fantasy-wise. So we'll jump right into it. Goalies for Ottawa this year. Anton Forsberg kind of led the way in all the stats. He led in games played at 46. Wins at 22. Goals against average at 2.82, and a nice save percentage at 917. Really, the start of the season was really a tire fire in Ottawa there. Murray had such a horrible start. He got buried in the minors, a lot of money down there. Then for a while they ran a tandem with Forsberg and Gustafsson till Forsberg kind of took over there and really stabilized things. Getting 22 wins for a goalie with the projected season that Ottawa is supposed to have, not too shabby. So he did show some fantasy value there, especially in the second half. D-man stats, no surprise, Thomas Chabot led him in goals at 7, assists at 31, and points at 38. Artem Zub led him in plus-minus at a big +1. As you can tell, a little bit of a rough season in Ottawa there. He also led him in hits at 155 and blocks at 124. Thomas Chabot, no surprise, led him in shots on goal at 173. Realistically, Chabot's the only one on the back end that really holds any fantasy value. He did get hurt this year, but his numbers were still decent considering. At certain points in the season, Del Zotto and Brandstrom did show a little bit of fantasy value. Possibly Zub if you're in a roto league and you needed to boost up your blocks or hits there. Little bit of value there, but not too much to speak of outside of Chabot there. Up front, forwards, Josh Norris led him in goals at 35. Brady Tkachuk led him in assists at 37 and points at 67. Matthew Joseph led him in plus-minus at a +12. A lot of that had to do with his time in Tampa before being traded, but he was a plus player while in Ottawa also. Brady Tkachuk led him in hits, 270 hits, another pesky Tkachuk in the league. He throws the body around. Austin Watson led him in blocks at 63, and Brady Tkachuk led him in shots on goal at 288. Really up front, it's Batherson, Norris, Tkachuk, and Stützle. They really had good fantasy seasons overall. Batherson and Tkachuk definitely in the first half. Tkachuk kind of kept her going throughout the season. And Norris and Stützle really turned it up in the second half of the season. So who is their biggest fantasy disappointment? For me, it has to be Erik Brandstrom. He was a piece in the Stone trade. He was supposed to be a really elite prospect. He just really hasn't turned it into much. He is still young at 22, but he had 13 points in 30 games played last year, so it looks like he was starting to turn the corner, and he only put up 14 points in 53 games this year, and they're all assists, no goals at all this year. And even when Chabot got injured, they bumped him up to the first power play, top pairing, and it just really didn't pan out for Brandstrom. Here's hoping. He's 22, he's young, that it does amount to something going forward, but he really was a disappointment fantasy-wise this year. Biggest fantasy surprise has to be Anton Forsberg. Realistically, going into the season, Murray was supposed to be the bona fide number one goalie there. Even though he'd see a lot of shots, Ottawa wasn't supposed to have that good of a season. But Forsberg stepped in, and when he did take over the crease, he really did put up really good fantasy numbers. I believe from January 1st he was top 5 in the league in save percentage, and he really stabilized things there. So it was a really nice surprise, earned him an extension. Can't say enough about what Forsberg did back there. Who's relevant fantasy-wise on a weekly basis? Well, Forsberg was once he took over that crease there. Chabot obviously on the back end. He's really the only piece in the back end there. And as I mentioned, Batherson, Norris, Tkachuk, and Stützle really were fantasy relevant-wise, especially in that second half there. Streamers, there's a couple of them to mention. Connor Brown was really good at times up front. Same with Alex Formenton. He had some decent spurts there as well. We'll be out in a few days with another one. Really do hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please remember to hit like, hit subscribe, and remember that notification bell. And enjoy the rest of the fantasy offseason, fantasy owners.